along the way. So the theme for today is all about communication. We have a day dedicated now for communicating with our kiddos, with our students, and I want to kind of share out some ideas on how we might do that. A reminder that in Synergy, and feel free to add questions in the chat along the way, and I'll touch base in between panes and between tasks as I go along the way. Can I get a thumbs up if you're able to see when I switch it to Synergy? You're able to see my screen? Okay, thanks, Bill. So in Synergy, again, that reminder, this is going to be probably one of the best pieces, I think, to be able to push out information. Although one of the critiques about distance learning, and I know that there are several out there, is that kids aren't really paying that close attention to email. So that might actually be part of our messaging this week when we reach out to families, is to remind kids if they have a mobile device to add it to their to add notifications from email using either Gmail or their preferred mail app. So when I click into communication, you have those options to send out. This is pushing out emails to parents, to students, or to both. I always send it to both. When I was pushing out information to Spanish students last year, you just select your sections, the ones that you want to push out to. I like to add a blind carbon copy so that I have a record that I can kind of tuck into a folder, maybe called communication, or maybe for that specific prep along the way. But basically, you're just selecting, to whom. Good opportunity here in carbon copy to add a case manager, a social worker, a paraprofessional. Like I'm thinking of people. There's a gal, Tammy, that works in with English folks. This would be a good opportunity to include them in any messaging, so that when you're pushing out things like deadlines, reminders, rubrics, etc., that they're in the loop on that also, and they can use those talking points with kids when they're connecting with them. Of course, include a subject line. Messages, just as a heads up, you can attach things that doesn't really come out as nicely. I like to link things, so if you want to think about using Google Drive, you can do that also here. When you're feeling ready with that, you would just hit send or send and return. Return brings you back to that prompt. So that's how to push out some communications quickly using Synergy. I'll come back to that question here shortly, Bill. That was a good question about fall. I'm just checking my agenda here. Google Voice is next. Can I get a thumbs up if you're using Google Voice already? You're using Voice already? Okay, that's great. So some of you are. Heads up. You all each have a Google Voice account. This is something that we know we have access through July 1. We don't know if we have access to this because it's a paid subscription. This is something that they unlocked for us, considering that it was distance learning, and we want to have teachers protect their personal phone numbers. So to avoid people reaching us at home in all hours on mobile devices on our own, we can use third-party calling features like this. Now, Google Meets and Hangouts also has a call-out feature. It was the one that I was suggesting early on in distance learning because we didn't know about voice until about 2 or 3 weeks in. And this is, again, where you would just dial out. So if I were to just, call my parents' phone number, I would just, enter the phone number there. When I get the full number, I would click on that being green, and it would dial out just like this. Heads up, one of the issues that we're seeing with teacher laptops is to be directing your voice directly at the webcam, because that's where your microphone is. You'll notice that I use earbuds when I present, because I find that anytime someone that is talking and they point away from the screen, that without the help of earbuds or some kind of a mic, I see some people using headset mics, for example, that really helps the quality of the audio in the call, just because the mics just really aren't that great in those teacher devices per what some people are sharing. If I were to text out, the second tab up here right underneath the calls is called messages. And if I wanted to send out a note by text, I would just say send a new text, and I would send that text as a phone number. So if I was just going to call, if I was going to text to somebody, I would enter that name, or sorry, the number. You also get a populated, in the phone calls, you also get a populated school directory. So you'll notice that a lot of these numbers that populate by searching. So if I were to search out for Jim Rude, for example, who's on the call, his number for work is going to come up. And it looks like he's also added his Google Voice here. So if you're searching by people, you'll find them both by directory for school and by Google Voice. Both I have found out, and add if you have found out otherwise, is that when you dial to Google Voice number, again, my number is listed here in the upper right is 920-322-7786. That is a phone number that also, when left a message, will go to email also, like we do at school. So it's nice that they sync in that way. No surprise that Google is clever like that. So any text messaging comes back here. I have had a chance to reach out to some people, getting them access, for example, to a Wi-Fi using a hotspot, students that didn't have access. I called a number, I sent an email, and then I actually ended up texting a mom recently to get her access to this Wi-Fi hotspot so that her kiddo could have access to get their schoolwork done. So my suggestion is, don't hesitate to reach out by text message to a parent, guardian, or a student. But I highly encourage you to use Google Voice Text and not a personal device, just to keep that barrier between you and students. And this is always going to keep a running record of that. So that's a little bit about Google Voice. You know, there are options in the settings to like sync it to your phone. I guess I like it in the sense that when I have work stuff on and my laptop is open, then it's, you know, useful that way. But I also like to be able to close my laptop for the day and not have it sync to my phone, so that I can keep time for family carved out. I know that's been taxing for people with children too along the way. Google Voice for voice and text. Google Classroom, you know, I guess for me, when I was in the classroom last year and teaching Spanish, that I was just pushing out information just in Google Classroom, and just, again, selecting who my students are, if I'm sending it to all students, if I'm sending it with an attachment. And again, that's part of the messaging that we want to encourage with kids, to say, hey, add notifications from Classroom, so that when you push out info, if they're not checking their email, they're probably getting those notifications on Classroom along the way. So Synergy, Google Voice, Google Classroom. I'm going to share some suggestions on how to document this. One of the things that we want to be cognizant when we're reaching out to people is that we want to have a log, some kind of a log of how many times that we've reached out to people. If people are getting, for example, grades that are NGs, we want to have nice documentation to say, hey, I reached out by email, I called that person, I even text message that person using Google Voice, so that you have a nice log of documentation, so at the end there aren't any surprises along the way, and if asked, that you can go back to that along the way. So back to that, something that Susan Fleming sends out each and every conference flex time is this nice hub of right around conference time, where we have communication time built into the contract. And there are several ways that are documented here on how to document. So including, some people have just created their own form where they can document. So now you have this that comes out as a spreadsheet when you fill that in. So that's one way to do it. There's also a way in Synergy to do this. And I I'm going to show you quickly how to do a student log. So I'm just going to pick on the first kid and the first student's first student in the seating chart for the first teacher that I grab. One of the options when you click into the kiddo is this log student contact. This is what I was doing last year between two buildings, between Anoka High School and Blaine High School, is I was just documented that way. That way kind of I had one go-to along the way. So that's something that you want to, consider in terms of documenting who you've reached out to along the way. Questions right away about the tech side of this stuff in terms of documenting. As a dad of 3 kids, I want to encourage you, and Peggy Crook really hit the nail on the head with the email that she sent yesterday about conversations that she is having with families, and that she is realizing that not every family has parents that have time, energy, availability. We have students who, for example, who are homeless. We have students whose first language isn't English. We have a lot of barriers with some children. And I guess I want to reiterate too of what Peggy shared yesterday, what the messaging from Jason and Amber that I hear consistently along the way about this is also a chance for us to show grace during a time where this is not, distance learning isn't what we chose. It's not what students chose. So I want to invite you to think about just leading with grace, with grading, and just be very mindful that we don't know that, if Chrissy and I weren't checking in our kiddos, maybe it's our 7th grader who is doing all the checking in. And if he's working with our 5-year-old, then he doesn't have the same amount of time to allocate to his schoolwork. So be mindful of that in the deadlines that come up, the remainder of distance learning, thinking about giving them grace with time so that maybe the assignment maybe isn't due the next day, but maybe it's maybe you give them a window of time, maybe a week along the way. So I guess I would suggest that not only as an educator, but as a dad of 3. Questions for the good of the group in terms of synergy communication, Google Voice, Google Classroom reminders, and then ways to document that using the Flex Hub.